Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast. This is episode 258 of the Human Element series. I am Chris Hadnagy, CEO and founder of Social Engineer, The Innocent Lives, and the Institute for Social Engineering. I've been hosting this podcast since way back in 2009. As always, these episodes are sponsored by our company, Social Engineer LLC. So if you're interested in our training schedule, we have quite a few training opportunities coming up. You can check that out on the website, social-engineer.com. And of course, we have a bunch of new services that you should check out too, some hybrid things that I won't even talk about here, but you can just go look them up. If you're interested in the topic of social engineering, you should be in our Slack channel. We have over 1,500 people in there every day talking about all aspects of social engineering. We even have a job board where we've had close to a dozen people find employment because their companies come in and post jobs, and then people are looking. And if you are looking for a legal, family-friendly chat, then we are it. So you can come in and join us there. If you're looking for something else, you should probably look elsewhere because that's not us. I also want to invite everyone to, by the way, you can find the link in the show notes. And if not, you can just ping me on LinkedIn and I'll be happy to get it for you. I know sometimes that link gets old and then it doesn't work. So just if that happens, let me know. I want to invite everyone who's listening to go check out the Innocent Lives Foundation at innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you're not familiar with our mission there, it's a nonprofit that we started about 6.5 years ago. And our mission is to help law enforcement around the globe geolocate people who traffic children and create child abuse material. And I'm really proud of the team over there. We have completed over 510 cases as of now. And we're still working hard with our mission. As you know, this problem's never going to go away. But if you're a parent or a caregiver, or if you're a young person who's battling with some things on the internet, there's a lot of information on the website and how you can talk to your kids about this and some resources where you can get help if you're dealing with some of these problems. We're there too to help if you want to reach out to us. You can do that at Report a Case, and we've been more than happy to jump in and assist you in any way we can. If you want to support us by joining, you can do that on the website, or if you want to help us through donations, you can do that too at innocentlivesfoundation.org. And if you like the music at the podcast here, if you're not on YouTube, because we can't play it on YouTube, it's none other than the band Clutch, the best rock and roll band on earth. You know, Neil Fallon, I'm a huge fan of the guy, and he helped me start the ILF 6.5 years ago, and their music is just awesome. So you should go check them out and do it live. That's the best way to take them in. And last but not least, if you like the content that you hear on this podcast, give us a thumbs up or a like and keep leaving those comments because your suggestions on topics really do help us to figure out what we should talk about next. Now let's get to the reason we're all here, to talk to our guest, Dr. Jade Thomas. She's a registered psychologist in London, UK. You remember Dr. Abby? She's been on a few times in our episode. This is like another Dr. Abby. Are you ready for this? By the age of 24, Dr. J became a university lecturer in psychology and mental health. And by 25, she opened up her own private psychological therapy practice, becoming the clinical director and founder of Luxe Psychology Practice. Luxe Psychology Practice strives to modernize mental health services by offering every client with a high quality, ethical, bespoke mental health care. We're going to find out all about what that is. Putting the client's experience first, ensuring that all clients receive 5-star mental health care and mental health treatment experience that they can be proud of. Dr. Jade has experience working in both with the NHS and the private sector in the UK, providing a wide range of client groups with high-quality therapeutic mental health care for a number of mental health issues, including trauma, relationships, depression, anxiety, and borderline personality disorder. Lastly, Dr. Jade is a published researcher in psychology and often provides media expert commentary to national and international press on issues pertaining to mental health, psychology, and celebrity behavior. That's an interesting last one. Dr. Jade, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
So let's talk about this, okay? Because, I mean, like Dr. Abby, 24, 25, I mean, how did you decide that this was going to be your path in life at that age?
I mean, it's one of those where I never was, I was never 9 years old or 10 years old and decided that that's what I wanted to do. But I suppose I've always been quite academic, and I was very fortunate to go to a very good school. And I never necessarily thought of myself as somebody who would go on to do a professional doctorate at all. I never was top of the class. I was never an A-star student, but I was very persistent and I would work hard and I had a really good work ethic. So I think that's really helped lead me to get my doctorate qualification and become a clinical director and founder of my private practice.
But since that wasn't your goal, at what point did you say, like I'm going to be a trauma psychologist, right? Because that's not like the norm. Like, I want to get a degree in psychology because I want to understand how humans think. But you go, I'm going to go trauma. Like, what drove you there?
I suppose it was one of those that it was a slow progress. It was never a light bulb moment. It was something that I was always fascinated by human behavior. I always had that natural curiosity, and I always had a natural curiosity and wanted to develop an understanding as to why humans behave in the way that they do, and particularly thinking about past experiences. And I think trauma is a funny one because lots of people will say, I haven't experienced trauma, but I think it depends how you look at it. And I say, when I'm working with people, I'll say to people that, we all experience some level of trauma in our lives. It might not be this huge disaster that you've experienced, but actually we all experience bereavement. We all experience loss or heartbreak to some extent. So even that can come under the umbrella of trauma. And the way that I define trauma with clients is anything that shatters your core belief system. So your core beliefs being the beliefs you hold about yourself, others, or the world, and any event or experience in your life that disrupts that in some way, that shatters that. And I think that was something that I was very fascinated with. And as I developed in my psychology career, was something that I started to notice with clients, that actually everybody's experienced trauma to some extent. And I think when I say that trauma is something that I specialize in, people think that I'm dealing with these huge, catastrophic disasters that people have experienced. And that's not always the case. Trauma can be something as simple as loss, whether that be loss of a relationship through a relationship breakdown, or it can be a bereavement. So I think it's developed quite slowly, and I think it's developed quite naturally as well as I've worked with various different people.
That's a really nice breakdown because, I think I was falling into that category. Like at the ILF, at the Innocent Lives, one of the first hires we ever did was a therapist to be on staff because we realized that anybody, and we don't look at the pictures, of course, but we're still reading the content of child abuse material is traumatic. So when I hear trauma, that's what I think of. And I think of our therapists having to serve all of our volunteers over there. So it's nice to kind of boil that down and hear the difference with that, because people would obviously, I would imagine, deal with those things in different ways. I would assume, right?
For sure. And I think the way that people deal with trauma is so individual. It's so unique, and it comes from their upbringing and how they've dealt with other things in their life, and their coping strategies. Some people have very positive coping strategies in how they deal with things, but other people don't have that. And it's usually because that hasn't been modeled to them before. They don't know what a positive coping strategy looks like. So that's where I come in, and I can work with people so we can start to unpick how they are coping, whether that be coping with trauma or coping with something else in their life. And we can really, figure out how they can cope with it in the best way possible, in a healthy way.
I was going to say, why are you calling me out here on the show, Doc? Really? I thought this was going to be friendly,
But everybody's so different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that part too, because it is so true. In your bio, you talked about like specializing, your services so that they're individualized, that they're bespoke, what does that mean in therapy? Because, you think about therapy, it's not like going to buy a tailored suit. So how do you accomplish that goal in your practice?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the way that I view people and the way that I practice is that although I'm coming in as the expert with the psychological expertise and knowledge, that I'm not an expert of the person sat in front of me. I haven't lived their life. So they are also bringing their own expertise of their experience in their life. And I like to work in a very collaborative way. And I think it's quite a modern way of working in therapy. And because I'm coming in as a young psychologist, I like to bring that modern approach. And I'm very candid with clients, and I'll say to them, I'm not a mind reader. I'm not an expert in your experience. That's where you come in, and we'll work together. I'll bring the psychological knowledge. You bring your knowledge of yourself and the way that you are and the way that you've lived, and we'll work together and we'll see how we can, make this better in some way. And I think, therapy is a funny one because one size doesn't fit all. Like you said, it's not like going to a store and buying a suit in some way. One size doesn't fit all. Everybody's different. Everybody works in a very different way. So I'll constantly, when I'm working with people, we'll constantly review in sessions of, is this working for you? Because I'm not a mind reader, like I said. And if they don't tell me, then I don't know, and we can't do anything to fix that. So it's about constantly working together collaboratively, constantly reviewing sessions and making sure that we're still striving to meet the client's goals. And goals are something that we talk about quite a lot. We'll talk about that in a first session of, why are you here? Why do you want to, what do you want to achieve in these sessions? And we'll constantly make sure that we're working towards that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Actually, you sound a lot like my therapist. Like at the end of every session, she'll say, how did you like it today? Or was there anything we could have done better? Or is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover? Mm-hmm. And at first I was like, why are you asking me this? What do you want to give you a live rating? Like, like a Yelp rating right here where we're sitting here. And she's like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Because if we didn't do something, then how can we possibly move forward if I'm not doing it right? And I'm like, dang, that's some humility right there. Right. Like being able to ask face to face, like, tell me where I'm not doing great. Mm-hmm. I really like that approach too, because it makes it very comfortable to be like, yeah, that didn't work, or, let's try something different,
Yeah. Yeah. And I would never want a client to leave and hold that in and feel like they couldn't tell me that. I feel like, it takes a while, but I like to build that really trusting relationship that I feel like clients could tell me if something wasn't working for them. And I always say to them, I'm open to feedback. Give me your feedback. I think it's really helpful for clients if they can develop that type of relationship with a therapist.
Have you ever had a problem, like because of your age, where someone thinks, oh my gosh, she can't possibly help me as a psychologist because she's so young?
Yeah, particularly when I was training. And I think when you get the trainee label at the front of your name, people tend to look and think you're young, you're training, you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But the way that I view that is actually I'm fresh out of the training program. I'm learning the new stuff. So actually, rather than somebody who might have been in practice, and yes, they have that fantastic 20 plus years of experience, 50 years of experience, that might be quite outdated now. And I think with psychology and mental health, it's something that's constantly progressing. It's something that, although I've got my doctorate, I'm not finished learning. It's something that you're constantly learning. You've constantly got to update the research and be constantly on top of it. So I think it's definitely something I have experienced. And I think people could look at me and think, well, what does she know? She hasn't experienced X, Y, Z. And that's kind of goes back to what I said before is, yes, I'm not coming in saying that I'm an expert in your life. I'm coming in, I've got the psychological knowledge and the expertise there, and we'll work together. But I think choosing a psychologist or a therapist is a very personal decision. And I think lots of people do like somebody that they can relate to. And if you can't relate to me, then I don't take it personally. That's okay. And I have a lot of young clients, which I think is quite nice because they obviously feel like they can relate to a practitioner who's young.
I love that framing. I love the way you kind of twist where someone can make it negative, but you say, but now I'm brand new out of school and I just learned all the newest techniques. That's a great framing. I asked that because my therapist is also way younger than me. And I always asked her, like, do you ever have people, like, especially men, get a little weird with that? Because I think she's amazing and it doesn't bother me that she's younger. Because for me, it's just about her knowledge, and she reads so much that every time we're talking about something, she'll refer a book or something. She's always educating herself. So it's always like a new study or something like that, which I just thoroughly appreciate. And like you said, had be somebody that was trained 30, 40, 50 years ago, they might be stuck in a way that just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. And I think the way that we view mental health, particularly in the UK, is changing. And I think it was something that was previously very shameful, and people didn't want to talk about it. And actually we're slowly becoming a little bit more like you guys in the US, that we're quite open about saying that we have therapy now. But actually that's not still everybody. Some people still feel quite embarrassed or quite shameful. And that's another thing with my practice, is I don't want people to feel shameful. I want them to feel really proud of it. And I think it can sometimes come across as, oh, you go to therapy, you must have a problem. Yes. And actually I have clients that they come and they say, I don't really have any problems, but I just feel like maybe it's a good space for me to figure out who I am or my path in life. And that's also okay too.
I love that, because, I know there was a time when I was much younger where if you said you had a therapist, you were probably crazy, right? And that's what everyone assumed. Yeah. Like if you were going to therapy, you probably tried to hurt yourself, or you did something wrong, or you were abused as a kid. And all of those things could be true, but it was like, there was, like you said, that stigma. So you never talked about it. And I don't know when the change was, but I got to say nowadays, it's like, I think everyone has a therapist and you just talk about it. Like here, it's just like, hey, so how was your therapy appointment this week? And it's like, it's just a common thing to talk about, and if someone doesn't have one, you're almost like, really? You don't have what? You know what therapist is wrong with you? Right. Yeah. It has changed. And I think COVID, I don't know how it happened in the UK. Maybe that you can let us know, like over here, when COVID happened, there was so much depression that, the need for therapists kind of went through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it was, such an isolating time for everybody that it was. And I think people were quite accepting of help because they recognized that this was beyond what anybody could have imagined. And this was beyond the help of friends or family, because they were experiencing it too. It was a worldwide experience, which is something that we very rarely see. So I think it was something that people thought, actually, this is where I need some professional support. But yeah, like you said, that stigma. And unfortunately, I think there's still a bit of a stigma here in the UK. We're not quite as advanced as the US yet, but that's something that I'm very passionate about coming in, being one of the new age of the psychologists, is I want to hopefully, be that person and be that spokesperson to say, actually, everybody should be having therapy. I think everybody should have therapy at some point in their life. And I think if you are lucky enough to find a therapist that you really connect with, to hold on to them. Yeah. And even if it's perfectly normal to take a break from therapy, but I think to keep checking in with them, over the course, we go through so many life changes. And I think it's a great way, and it's such a unique space that you don't have anywhere else in your life. And I'll say that to clients. I'll say, I'm listening at a different capacity than friends and family. And I'm trained in trauma, and I'm trained to hold that and to hold your pain and to deal with it in a different way than friends and family. Because I think people sometimes think, well, why don't you just talk to friends and family about it? Why do you need a therapist? But actually, it's a very unique experience in a therapy session.
I have a question on this, because I imagine just from talking to you here that you're a lot like, so my therapist's name is Natasha. I've talked about her before on the show. I call her Dr. Molotov, because she does these things like where she'll listen and then she'd just drop like a Molotov cocktail on my lap, and it's like a truth bomb. And it's like, what the heck? And then she's like, okay, session's over. How did we do today? I'm like, you can't just end it right there. Like, it's like literally like we were going 100 miles an hour. Anyhow, but she does this thing where like, I never, ever, ever feel judged. Ever. Yeah. How do you do that? Like, how do you have a conversation with someone and maybe they say something that inside of you, it's like, you can never do that. It's like morally irreprehensible for you to even think about that, but then sit there and not even show a nonverbal that looks like a judgment. How do you do that?
Because I think the way that I see it is that everybody has their own story and everybody has their own experience. And I'll sometimes say to clients, I'm not here to be a truth detector or a lie detector. So if you decide to not tell me the full truth, then that's on you. I'm not here to judge whether you're telling me the full story or something. So I think it's about actually what they choose to tell me. And if it's something that they find very, very shameful, I'm really proud of them that they've been able to tell me that, because I think, wow, that's really taken some courage for you to voice that. And many times clients will tell me that I'm the only person they've ever told that. And I find that such a empowering thing for them, that they've been able to actually voice something that they find very embarrassing or very shameful. So I don't look at it in a judgmental way. I actually look at it as maybe a missing piece of the puzzle that we've been working towards for such a long time in the sessions, for example. Or I'll think, well, that's really interesting that they chose to tell me that, and that they felt so safe or so listened to and heard that they were able to share that with me. And obviously everything that we talk about in therapy are pieces to a puzzle in some way, and they all mean something. They all carry their own meaning. So I think that's the way that I look at it. It's not, I'm never coming from a judgmental place. I'm coming from a place of, actually, that's fantastic that you've been able to tell me that. It's so empowering for you, or we can really use this, or this makes a lot of sense now, or I suppose it depends on what they've shared, but that's the way that I tend to view it.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think that's a difference between telling friends and family and talking to a good therapist, right? Is that friends and family are always going to judge you. Like if you were to say some of the things you say in therapy to them, they'd be like, what the heck were you thinking? Like, what's wrong with you? Right? That's going to come out of their mouth, even if they hug you afterward. Natasha's never said that to me. Right. So I mean, I think that is the big difference why people can feel comfortable. But I love the way that you control that. That's a nice lesson, I think, in just communication. I think overall, like not that everyone needs to be a therapist, but just when someone's telling you something, to kind of have that thought in your head that they're just sharing a piece of the puzzle with me. So if I can not judge them, that might make the conversation so much better. Yeah.
And I think as well, it's what I sometimes say to clients when they say, oh, I told my partner this, or I told my friend and they had this reaction and it was really unhelpful, is people aren't trained as in the way that therapists are trained. But also it's about, sometimes people just need somebody to listen to them. They don't need me to say anything necessarily. They're not looking for advice. They acknowledge that what they did was maybe not the right decision, or they can't understand why they did what they did. But I'm not there to say, you should have done this. I'm there to just hold that for them. And maybe we'll come back to that later. And sometimes I'll say to clients, well, actually, a few sessions ago, you brought this up. And then that's where we fit it in, and that's where they develop the understanding. But I think with friends and family and people that are close to us, they often fall into the category of wanting to fix things. They care about somebody. They want to be there to fix them. And I'll say to clients, I'm not here to fix you. I don't see you as broken. I'm not going to be Mrs. Fix-It. And sometimes I will fall into that because it's my natural human instinct. I want to help people. That's why I'm in the job that I'm in. But I'll be really candid with clients, and I'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm falling into Mrs. Fix-It here. And actually that was maybe not helpful for you in some way. But sometimes they'll say, no, it was really helpful. But I think with friends and family, we have that natural caring, for them. We want to help them in any way we can, but actually it might not always be the communication or solution that we need.
So my wife and I have come up with this method so we can avoid arguments over that, which is when she comes to me, says, I want to talk to you about something. I ask, is this a listening conversation or a fixing conversation?
Yes.
And if she says listening, then I know I don't have to think about a solution. I just kind of shut the brain off and just listen. Right. And if she goes, no, I really need help with something, I'm like, great, it's a fix it. And that has like reduced arguing over that topic, like by 90%. Right. Because I'm one of those guys. I mean, she gives me this problem. I'm making solutions. I'm looking information up. I'm doing whatever it is that needs to be done to fix that problem. I'm doing it. Right. It's just kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And that's a technique that I'll sometimes say to clients if they say that the opinions that they received from friends and family weren't helpful. I will say, well, maybe you need to be more candid. They're not mind readers either. So maybe you need to be more candid in actually what you want from them.
I love that. Yeah. I love that because, it's true. I mean, I think the majority of our problems when it comes to, people that we're close to is communication, right? Just poor communication. Like we're either not saying something to make it expressly clear of what we're really wanting in this situation, or we're just not communicating our emotions in an effective way. At least what I've noticed.
For sure. And I find that when I work with couples or when I work with people with relationship problems. So it's something called meta communication, which is communicating about communicating. And that you tend to find it a lot in relationship breakdowns, that actually the core of the conversation gets missed. So I'll often give what I call the laundry example. So that example being a couple maybe arguing because one partner is constantly leaving their dirty laundry on the floor, and they'll say, I wish you would pick up your dirty laundry. And the other partner doesn't pick up their dirty laundry. And actually the argument or the conversation then becomes about, you're not listening to me. You're not listening to what I'm saying. The dirty laundry is staying on the floor. So actually the core of the problem is still there, but the argument has changed. The argument is now about that you're not listening to me. And I'll give that example to clients, and they can instantly think of so many examples of that, where that's happened in their relationships or even with friends and family. And I think it's, communication about communication is a fascinating topic in itself. But like I said, it's called meta communication if anybody's interested in finding more about it. But it comes up a lot in therapy.
So what would be because now you're stuck a whole nother topic here. What would be your suggestion in, let's not use a marriage, but in a friendship, if one of the people don't want to meta communicate, they don't want to communicate about communication?
Well, I think we've got to communicate in some way. So I think it obviously depends on the context, and it depends on maybe the relationship breakdown and what's led to that. There's usually a lot more to it, but I think it's about, we've got to have an understanding. And when I do communication work with clients, assertiveness comes up a lot. So we end up talking about that you've got passive aggressive communication, you've got aggressive communication, and then you've got assertiveness communication, which sits in the middle. And that's what we want to strive for in as many different relationships as we can. Because the thing with assertiveness is it's about respecting your own needs, but also respecting other people's needs. Whereas with aggressive communication, you're disrespecting your own need. You're disrespecting other people's needs and only respecting your own. And passive aggressive communication is the opposite of that. So you're disrespecting your own needs and respecting other people's needs. So I think you want to find that balance. And I think if somebody doesn't want to find that balance, you've got to question if that's going to be a relationship that's going to continue in the long term, because we need to be open. We need to have these conversations with people. If you want, relationships take work at the end of the day. And I think sometimes people think it's this magical thing, whether that be a romantic relationship or a friendship or a family relationship. People tend to think relationships are this magical thing that just happens. And if something suddenly isn't working, it must be wrong. And that's something that I also share with people that I work with is they take work. They're like everything in life. We have to work at it. We have to communicate. We have to understand the other person. They have to understand us. So I think it would be, if somebody was really adamant that they didn't want to communicate or have a conversation about the way they're communicating, then I would question if they were actually going to be ready for that relationship.
Okay. So give me an example. So let's say you and I are friends. You feel like I'm not listening to you. You're trying to get something across to me. Give me an example of aggressive versus assertive communication, because I want to make sure I have that clear in my head, because I tend to be aggressive. So I want to make sure, because I'm self-applying everything you're saying. So I'm trying to see how am I doing this? Am I doing good or bad?
So a technique that I give to clients, which is, from my perspective, foolproof, but it's the ABC method. So it's a great method if you want to be assertive and you want to communicate in an assertive way rather than aggressive. So ABC just means when you do A, I feel B, next time I prefer C. And what we tend to do when we communicate with people, and you can probably think of examples, and we do it with humans, we make mistakes, but we tend to say, you made me feel like something. And actually, if you think about it, they didn't necessarily make you feel something. Their behavior made you feel a certain way, but they didn't make you feel a certain way. They don't have that power. They don't have that control. Their behavior did. So it's about really separating that. So you can say, when you did A, whatever that might be, when you I don't know, didn't reply to my message, I felt B. So you're owning how you felt. You're saying that that behavior made me feel a certain way. Next time I'd prefer it if you just gave me a heads up that you're not going to be replying or whatever that might be.
I like that. Okay. So now take that same example. Let's just say it's a replying to a message. What would be passive aggressive? What would be a passive aggressive?
Passive aggressive is, so like I said before, passive aggressive is when you are disrespecting your own needs and only respecting the other person's needs. So I sometimes do a role play with clients, which they find quite funny, where I'll get them to ask me as a friend, I'll say, you know, let's do a role play where you ask me to go to a restaurant. And they will say, okay, do you want to go to a restaurant? And they find it quite strange, but actually the purpose of it, they start to really understand why I'm doing it. And I'll give a very passive response of, for example, okay, well, where do you want to go? And they'll say, oh, well, I'll go, we could go here. And I'll say, okay, great. What time do you want to do it? And there's no level of, and they'll say, I don't know, they might say 7 o'clock. And I'll say, oh, okay, well, 7 o'clock doesn't really work for me, but don't worry, I'll move something around so that I can come for 7 o'clock. So it's constantly, it's not finding that middle ground of, actually, that's not going to work for me. Could we do it slightly later? If they say, no, that's not going to work for me. Okay, could we find another day? So it's about completely putting your needs to the one side and just respecting the other person's.
I feel like this was a therapy session. Like, because I think I need to fix my aggressive and passive aggressive communication habits. I really love the ABC thing though. That's kind of great because it is so true. I mean, like people don't, unless someone's being mean to you, they're not trying to make you feel anything, right? They're just, they took an action and now you allowed yourself to feel that action. So, and then saying next time I prefer this, that's such a beautiful way of saying this is what I really would like. And if that person doesn't do it, then they're kind of showing you how valuable you are to them. So then you have to make a decision if you're going to stay in that friendship or not. That's really valuable. That's wow. I mean, I think like everyone's going to, when you're listening to this episode, I'm going to put an announcement, lay on the couch before you listen to this episode, because you're going to get some free therapy right here.
Well, I think that the ABC method is great because it can work in so many different settings. Yeah. It can work in romantic relationships with friends, in work settings. And I think people find it quite difficult to be assertive because they don't know if they're stepping into the territory of being aggressive. Yeah. And I think with that, if you just keep that method in your mind, if you've got to speak to your boss about something at work, for example, it's a great method to use, and it's a really simple one.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I could think of a million applications in business and professional and personal life of that. And imagine if everybody can learn to do that. Wow. Can you imagine how much better communications would be?
Yeah, I love communication work and assertiveness work in therapy. When somebody says that they want to work on their communication, I'm like, right, let's go. It opens up a whole new world, I think, of therapy, and it's a strand of cognitive behavior therapy, really, and that's the more practical side of therapy where we focus on strategies and tools, and that's a part of therapy that I really love.
I love it. Okay. So Dr. Jade, if people want to follow you, they want to know more about you and your work, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
You can find everything on my website, which is www.Luxe Psychology Practice. So LUXE psychologypractice.com. And it's got all the links there to socials and everything like that.
Perfect. And we'll make sure everyone that's in the show notes. So we have that, and we'll also link your Instagram there. A couple of questions we've been asking people we've been doing this podcast since 2009, if you can believe that. I mean, I didn't even want to know how old you were in 2009. That would make me feel really terrible. Okay. But we've been doing this podcast for a long time. And when we started it, I said, I love to read. You know, I have a giant library behind me. So I would always ask a guest like, hey, do you have any books you'd recommend? And it doesn't even have to be about the topic. Yeah. And then we got so many great recommendations. We started building a book list on our website. So now we have this like 13-year book list, and we link every podcast to it. And I can't tell you how many people have written in and said that they've made that like their go-to reading list. So are there any books that you've read that you say, man, everyone should read this book?
Yes, I've got two, and both of them that I recommend to clients. So one of them being Atomic Habits by James Clear. And yeah, it's quite a well-known book, but fantastic if you're looking to break bad habits and learn how to build positive habits. And then the second book, again, something that I recommend to clients all the time, and really great, again, if you're interested in how humans work, human behavior. It can really be helpful for understanding different types of relationships, whether that's romantic, professional, whatever it might be. But that's called Games People Play by Eric Berne. And yeah, it's a fantastic book. It's quite psychology jargon orientated at the start, but once you get past that and it starts going into the different games, it's really, really interesting. I've recommended it to friends, family, clients, everybody.
I love that. I don't think we've had either of those, but the reason I kind of chuckled at Atomic Habits, it's kind of funny. This morning, my trainer was telling me something about habits, and he said a lot of times people don't reach their goals. And I'm probably going to butcher the way he said it, but he said a lot of times that the reason people don't reach their goals is they're too forgiving of themselves, and they don't hold themselves accountable for not accomplishing the things that will make them achieve their goals. So like you miss your workout and you go, well, I just missed one. That's okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, no, I gotta, reward yourself for doing it, and then not like punish yourself severely, but have a punishment system that like, I didn't accomplish this, so I can't just say I'm good today. And he had another little statement about that. And I was so like, this conversation just kind of so fascinating me. I put it on LinkedIn. I'm like, hey, everyone, this is kind of my thought of the morning. And somebody commented and said, this reminds me of a book I'm reading called Atomic Habits and about changing your goal setting and things. And I'm like, that kind of made me smirk that you just happened to say it when I just happened to get that recommendation also from someone else this morning. Small world. Yeah.
That is crazy. Yeah. I love talking about habit building. I think the golden rule is if you want to break bad habits, make them harder. So put the cookie jar in the cupboard, put it out of sight. And if you want to build positive new habits, make it easier. Put your gym workout clothes out in the morning, make it more enjoyable. Go for a nice walk beforehand, before going to the gym, if that was the positive habit you wanted to make. And that's kind of the golden rules that you can take away from that book. Obviously, it's in way more detail than that, but again, something that I talk to clients a lot about.
I love it. Thank you. I'm sure, like all of us, you've probably had some people in your life you'd consider a mentor, somebody that helped you get to where you are. I know for me, there's a few people that I could name that have really, really enhanced my life and career. Who would you say are some of your one or two greatest mentors that you have?
I think that's such a great question. I think with mentors, it changes as you go through different stages of life. But I think two people that have been a constant for me is my mum and dad. I'm an only child, so I've got a really special bond with both of my parents, but they've constantly been there for me. They've been supportive throughout my entire academic career, which has been a long one. And they've never been pushy. They've never pushed me. They've just supported me. And I've really always appreciated that. And I go to them all the time with problems, dilemmas, whether that be personal, professional. And I know it's quite interesting. I know which parent to go to for what it might be. So business related and I suppose logical, I go to my dad. More emotional stuff, I'll go to my mum. So I think they've been two constant people in my life that have, mentored me in many different ways, personally and professionally.
That's wonderful. I think my daughter does the same thing. So sometimes I'll hear stuff from my wife. She goes, oh, did Amaya talk to you about this? I'm like, no, I didn't hear about this until you told me. And then I'll do the same thing. She's like, oh, she didn't tell me that. So I know that she's like, separating what she talked to us about, which is, I understand that, right? It makes sense.
Of course.
Oh, this was a fascinating conversation. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I was just going to say, kids know who to go to for what.
Yeah. This was really, really great. And I think we probably could have went on for another hour or so, but just pick your brain about all these little things. But it'd be great to have you back on again in the future. I'm sure the people listening would love this. I would
love that. Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having the approach to therapy that you do. I really hope that you can be that spokesperson in the UK to bring about the change, because that is very needed. I'm really happy we did that here in the States, because it feels more comfortable to be able to openly say, I have a therapist, and not everyone look at me like I'm a weirdo.
Yeah. It's a good thing, people. It's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I will say that also. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the wonderful conversation. Next month, we'll be joined by Stephanie Armengau to discuss behavioral performance. So I can't wait to have that discussion. Until then, stay safe. See you.